I think it's fairly obvious that Vanguard hasn't been the peak for the Call of Duty series. In fact, some characterize it as the embodiment of a shallow, uncreative. As Treyarch was trying to perfect their craft, and pieces of ideas, either to be revisited in the future or never show up again. With the basic beginning of the novel, the additions from the possibility of achieving high rounds now viable with Shinonuma, the next map is the last map of World of War, and was the final conclusion. When looking at World of War, there's a certain beauty to the old maps and their presentation, the role they play much later on for zombies, and the general progression within the game. If we look at World of War and the role it played much later on, we'll find that it's a story of the developers trying to find the right direction for a game mode entirely made out of passion, and a desire to continuously improve from the last iteration through innovation, progress, and ambition from the previous map. Zombies progressed into far more extensive maps from the beginning. We went from a simple bunker where you could only rely on your weapons to having mini upgrades for the player and having much more expansive maps that empowered the player. For the time, this was a good direction for the mode, and it ultimately was essential to do this, not just to make the gameplay better, but so the game mode could grow further. But as we progressed through the series, Treyarch got ambitious and continuously made maps much larger. Black Ops 1 would show the gradual growth of each map, and as every map ended up having far more features, it was a larger map than the last. This ambition to expand and innovate upon the previous iteration would eventually culminate in creating a map like Transit, primarily due to a desire to create a large map for players to progress through, and especially for the time, being the closest thing zombies had to an open world map, where players could explore bits and pieces of the map and discover locations that they might have not known before, or just Google searched on YouTube. But Transit would end up failing, partially due to that constant over-ambition. The engine needed to be stronger to implement the ideas that the developers had, which for the time wasn't possible. They had to practically butcher the map design rather than trying to scale back the actual size of the map into something playable. While Transit has a lot of flaws, it serves as an essential lesson of what happens when you get too ambitious and end up unable to scale back on your ambitions to more realistic levels. But we'd see that ambition continue throughout the series, past Black Ops 3, 4, Cold War, and going forward. I suppose in retrospect, when analyzing the old World of War maps, while they retain a quality of their own, we'll notice that the seeds for the eventual exhaustion and the constant growth and the ambition of zombies were planted in the very game that started it. But going back for a moment, before focusing on the gradual expansion of this map size and features that Black Ops 1 would focus on, World of War was nearing its conclusion. Despite planning on 2 final maps for the game mode, Riese would be the final map of World of War as part of the 3rd map pack. While nowadays we might think that a map like Riese is what we expect is what every zombie map should be like in terms of its features at the bare minimum, I'd argue that for the time, and especially in comparison to the previous maps, Riese was pretty ambitious in terms of its direction. Through simplicity, hardship, and empowerment, each previous map had its own sense of approaching the zombies formula, primarily handled the progression far more differently than the last. It's difficult to imagine a map successfully combining each aspect of the previous map into one single map and pulling it off. But Riese manages to succeed at it, and retain its own sense of identity while still using ideas and aspects of the previous maps. It's for that reason, among others, while Noct is the beginning of zombies, Riese is the rebirth into a new conception of zombies that lasts across Black Ops 1 and up until Die Rise and Black Ops 2. However, throughout the series, if there was one feature that I've always liked, it's how the developers use alternative ways to lead a player to a specific part of the map or show new concepts and ideas. Earlier in the series, I mentioned maps that did this, like Ferucht and Noct, where the developers contrast the color or lighting of the map to highlight certain parts of the map to the player. But they ended up using this technique past World of War. On the map Kino, right after you turn on the power, you immediately can spot Juggernaut by the contrast in color. It's to the point that it's impossible to miss it. Maps Ahead also used this style in a different way, and one of the more obvious ways they did this is in Call of the Dead, where the lighthouse lights up one section of the map to show where Pack-a-Punch is. It doesn't necessarily have to be a light or show a contrast in color either. In a map like Ferucht, they introduce Juggernaut right as a spawn room, and it introduces the player to perks straight from the get-go. I adore this style because it makes you actually have to focus on the area you're moving through to find specific features and innovations of the map. Plus it helps with the flow of the map and helps lessen the downtime during your games. It's one reason out of many that I appreciate the World of War maps, especially a map like Riese that heavily utilizes it for progression and your general gameplay. Take Pack-a-Punch for example. It's one of the new features of Riese and is shown right in front of the player at spawn. Because of how it's positioned and how different Pack-a-Punch looks compared to the other machines you've seen, and how it doesn't tell you from the get-go how you get it, it immediately gets you invested in finding out what this new machine does for new players, and for old players, it showcases a reward or a final step, I suppose, for finishing the in-game progression. And while we'll be discussing Pack-a-Punch much later on, it was one of the many steps Der Riese took at the rebirth of zombies. When we look at Der Riese, it's a pretty popular map, with many people loving it, especially on its release. It's no surprise that this map has been remastered multiple times and was released for Black Ops 3 early on. Although, for clarification, in this video, I will not be discussing the Black Ops 3 version, as I feel it deserves its own much smaller video that shares some of my thoughts on it. But in the aim of the analysis series, I will be seeing what the final map of World at War has to offer. It's a true conclusion to World at War before we delve into Leviathan, Black Ops 1, the other games that I'd like to analyze. So, without further ado, let's begin.
Gentlemen, it is with the utmost urgency that I draw your attention to the lack of funding being injected into the giant project. You must be very diligent, Miss Samantha. Owning a dog is a great responsibility. Edward, tie the damn thing down! What? Must not proceed before. We must get out of here. What? Edward, what are you doing? Open the door! Edward, open this door!
Goodbye, Dr. Maxis.
Power levels critical.
Imagine that. We need to turn the power on. How original.
Beginning the map, Der Riese follows a similar style to Shinonuma, with a large spawn room, and follows a similar style to Ferucht by introducing the player to innovations and the choices you have. While I already mentioned some details on Pack-a-Punch, the choice is given to the player early on by using the doors you can buy. Now, Der Riese will continue the same map design of having two options for doors that you can go down, but the map improves on Ferucht's initial route to power by leaving it to the player's choice. But similar to Shinonuma, the doors give you control over the zombie spawn and the general direction of where the zombies will mainly come from. Now, this on its own wouldn't matter too much, but when it comes to how Der Riese utilized it, this ends up becoming one of the better parts of the map design because the player will need to return to the spawn room multiple times, especially if you decide to stay here for a high round strategy. You can also buy both sides of the spawn room, and what this ends up creating is a chaotic spawn where the undead are practically flooding and surrounding the spawn room in all directions. Although there isn't much of a point to it, I will say, I suppose it's helpful if you want to link the teleporters faster for Pack-a-Punch, but it's unnecessary. Additionally, in an attempt to seek a balance between players who might be used to playing on Ferucht or Shinonuma, the two routes to power resemble the general gameplay of those respective maps. For example, on the pathway towards the animal testing area and the lab, it's more close quarters and straightforward as Ferucht, while the opposite path to the hangar and furnace is largely open and free of movement like Shinonuma. And while most players prefer heading towards the furnace and the hangar area, the map still allows you to choose whichever direction you'd like to go, and you're never at an inherent disadvantage for going to a particular route to power. Additionally, Der Riese gives you a feel of interest in its setting and story by the use of visuals and sound design. While playing the map, you can sometimes hear a siren playing in the background. You can also hear the sounds of a large clock, or hear the distant sounds of machinery still operating long after the outbreak in this area. Visually, you can see burning buildings, blood all over the walls, and experiments throughout the facility. At one point, there's even a hanged scientist if you look carefully enough. All of this adds to a general interest and feel to the setting of the map. And when you can see an SOS and help messages written on top of buildings, and with just how empty the map is as you travel around, it adds to that general feel of mystery. But this by itself wouldn't mean much if there wasn't anything to discover. Der Riese manages to perfect that feeling of mystery not just by visuals and audio, but by the presentation of the story and the additions of the Easter egg. While Shinonuma began the story by the introduction of characters and beginning the move towards using conspiracy theories within the story, Der Riese managed to perfect this presentation. Throughout the map, you can encounter radios or slips of paper that tell you a small bit of the story of and what happened in the facility. And while it gives the backstory of the characters, the zombies, and the hellhounds, it opens the door to theories and speculation about the story and adds to that general feel of the map. It adds to that feeling that you're uncovering a far larger story than what it seems on the surface. And because you actively sought it out, it just manages to have such a great feel to the map that only a few maps can actually achieve. There's also a giant leap in improvement in the use of conspiracy theories between Shinonuma and Der Riese. See, in Shinonuma, while I mentioned references to Tunguska and gave an idea of how the zombies came from through the use of the 115 meteor and the quotes that came along with it, it isn't implemented properly because it barely has much of a connection to the setting. While the detail is neat, you could put it on a different map and it'd still be able to tell the same story that Shinonuma tried telling. In Riese, the use of the conspiracy theories land perfectly here because of the connection to the setting, and in my opinion, it's what led to the appeal of the story early on. The use of implementing conspiracy theories such as Die Glocke and the wonder weapons works wonderfully with the setting, and it's interesting as the setting of Riese itself is based on a real project called Project Riese. Because of that direct connection to the setting, it leads to a far more interesting map to the player. The story and how it's presented in Riese feels perfect, and while the story would be expanded far later on, take different directions in the plot, and even reach multiple conclusions, if there is one thing that is timeless about this map, it's how the presentation of the story is handled. And if there is another aspect about the map that's also handled well, it'd be the progression. When it comes to the progression towards power, Riese is unique because it manages to do something similar to how Ferucht handled the progression to power, and that you have this one direction going to power that's short, simple, and meets with the other side of the map. Riese expands on it by giving alternative routes that don't necessarily lead to power, but lead to the progression of opening Pack-a-Punch and the utilization of transportation on the map. It even adds an area past power, giving you more to explore than just stopping at the power switch. However, by the time you turn on the power, instead of then getting perks and getting better guns and ending it there, there's instead an addition to the in-game progression, which is Pack-a-Punch. Pack-a-Punch is one of the most important aspects of not just Riese, but zombies as a whole, even to the point that it's been a feature in practically every major zombies map after Riese. And by spending 5,000 points, you're able to upgrade your weapon. The machine ups the damage and increases the ammo of your gun. If there is something I adore about Pack-a-Punch, it's that feeling you get when you first use it and see the unique effects it does to a gun after you upgrade it. For example, if you upgrade an M1 carbine, what would normally be a semi-automatic gun that doesn't do too much damage, becomes a fully automatic rifle that dealt more damage, had a little bit more ammo. And if you upgrade your starter pistol, you can shoot explosive rounds. Stuff like that is great, and I wish they did that a lot more going forward. But since it practically makes most weapons far more useful in the high rounds, it manages to empower the player's setup, and it helps you actually reach further rounds more faster and efficiently. It's especially helpful when it's really easy to open up. To open up Pack-a-Punch, you just need to link the 3 teleporters around the map into the mainframe at spawn. It's pretty easy to do, but the game does reward you for progressing through it by giving you power-ups for linking the teleporter, or rarely if you decide to teleport. But by placing a simple transport system as one part of this progression system, it allows the player to immediately be familiar with the transportation of the map, and utilize it whenever they have the points to spare. Transportation systems like the teleporters aren't the first attempt Treyarch had at handling transportation. On Shinonuma, the map had a fairly basic transportation system called the zipline, which would take you from one part of the map back to the central hub. But that said, the teleporters act similar to the ziplines in the sense that it's a system that takes you to the central area of the map, which would be the spawn room. And it even ends up becoming more useful because of the fact that it fixes most of the issues of the zipline. Instead of being placed in one singular part of the map that's not too important outside of a random perk in the box, the teleporters are placed in 3 separate areas that act as an extension to the area they're located in, and can serve as a quick getaway. Not to mention, instead of having to wait a long time until the zipline reaches the main base and zombies can just immediately swarm you, you just watch a short animation and are teleported to the spawn room where you can choose to run, Pack-a-Punch, or hold out here if you choose to. Additionally, there was a problem in Shinonuma where you never really had to use the ziplines because the map was incredibly easy, and you'd end up benefiting from not going to the doctor's quarters after picking up your perk there. Now, Riese contrasts this completely. The map is chaotic, hectic, and fun in almost any way you play. Either camping at the catwalk, training below, or even training at spawn, there is a countless amount of strategies you can do on this map. You'll even end up using the teleporter at some point during your game. Whenever I play Riese on repeat playthroughs, it's always a blast to play, and if I want to, I can switch up the strat I'm using during my game and still have a great time if I get bored or want to try out something else. It's not exactly an easy map either, because some areas of the map are cramped, and the zombie cap limit is removed as well, so you might end up losing too much ammunition to progress around, and you have to really start relying on dog rounds, which aren't too easy as well. You can't even rely on the Wunderwaffe too much, because if you fire too close to yourself, you end up damaging yourself, and you lose your health regeneration for the rest of the game, which on co-op, the only way to fix this is to go down. But what this essentially means is, if you damage yourself with the Wunderwaffe in solo, you end up losing your health regeneration for the rest of the game. This glitch is only in the World of War version, and it can be the cause for really infuriating ends to high round attempts, because even if it looks like you healed yourself, it only takes 1 or 2 heads to kill you, which can end your game fast. I know I've suggested for people to play JB's shady remaster maps for World of War in my last video, and in this circumstance I still highly recommend it, because it removes that glitch, and it makes the gun actually useful, and the map more playable. Plus you can change any part of the mod that you'd like, and while it is a mod, it's really helpful for anyone wanting to play the map again on World of War and not deal with the features that break the map. And if there is one thing I need to say about the other versions of the map, the remaster for this map, if not all the World of War maps in Black Ops 1, are pretty lazy. While they add new wonder weapons like the Thunder Gun and Noct, and the Winter's Howl and Ferucht, and even add a perk called Mule Kick from Moon, Shinonuma and Riese are practically the same as their World of War counterpart, just placed in the Black Ops 1 engine, and has Black Ops 1 mechanics, which on its own isn't too bad. Lazy as it is, it's still fun to play the Black Ops 1 versions when you can, but it's still pretty jarring to see no animation for any of the World of War weapons when you dolphin dive, and especially seeing the Kino Pack-a-Punch camo on Black Ops 1 guns instead of the actual camo on Riese. But if there is a critique I can give to this map, it'd have to be a certain strategy that completely breaks everything about this map. See, if you choose to solely go through the animal testing area, turn on power, or run past the bridge through the animal testing area, you end up in this small area that seems awful to train in or even camp. Would you be surprised to know that there's a strategy in this room that breaks the map here? Remember all the way back in Ferucht when I mentioned that the zombie spawns are tied to what door you open? Well, because you didn't open up any of the doors on the hangar side of the map, or even the door that leads to the teleporter, what ends up happening is that all the zombies on the map go through this one single window, and so long as you hold the barricade and effectively use the Wunderwaffe, you're set for around 1 billion. This strategy is so easy to do, it destroys the chaotic gameplay of the map. It destroys the progression system completely, because even if you're unable to Pack-a-Punch, it's negated by the fact that you can just keep surviving however long. Hell, if you want to go further, it's arguably just about as easy as World of War Shinonuma, and that shit had a zombie cap limit that caused it to be even easier. And you'd think with something like that, they'd place restrictions or try to fix it in future remasters, especially ones like the Giant. But guess what? In every single version, including modded, this glitch is here, and easy as hell for you to do. Hell, it's even easier on Black Ops 3 because they place gobblegums in this area, meaning you could literally reach whatever round you'd like and speedrun 2 in 40 minutes. I'm not necessarily against something like this because I like the idea of manipulating zombie spawns, and it's an idea that's been pretty prevalent in most of the maps, most likely because of an oversight or intention. It's perfect if you want to speedrun to a certain round or reach a higher round without wasting your time. But if you want a genuine fun and fair attempt at this map, I recommend just not doing this strategy, especially if it's your first time trying this map or on revisits, because it completely destroys the map and ruins the game completely. But aside from that, I don't really have any significant issue with the map. Whenever people talk about this map, people usually refer to Pack-a-Punch as one of the best innovations of this map, but never anything else. To me, I think this misses out on something pretty good as well, which is the map layout and the spawn. Riese's spawn was good enough that in maps going onwards, they always utilize some aspect of Riese in their spawn room, map layout, or progression. Kino is the most obvious one that comes to mind, but even Call of the Dead has the idea of Riese's spawn room by having ziplines lead to the spawn room and giving the player a large area that helps deal with George. And besides that, most maps after this always had the choice of going through 2 directions, which eventually would lead to power, and most maps afterwards implemented transportation systems based on what Shinonuma started and what Riese refined. And besides that, it's pretty impressive how revolutionary this map was for zombies, and especially for World of War. See, each individual map had their own role and their own way of approaching the formula. Noct was the bare bones beginning that showed a really good concept through its simplicity. Ferucht was a difficult map that placed zombies towards a good direction through the hardship of its gameplay and innovations. Shinonuma was the map to empower the player by being an incredibly easy map that opened the gates to other strategies like training, and its map layout was large and open for players to utilize. And Riese was the map that combined every aspect of the previous map and had it work, while creating a far better experience that worked for this map. Like I said before, you can train on this map, you can camp on this map, you can play zombies however you like on this map. It complements the gameplay of each map before, and the atmosphere of the map is through the environmental storytelling you can find outside or inside, which is reminiscent of Ferucht and Shinonuma. And the map can be easy, like Shinonuma, or difficult, like Ferucht. While Pack-a-Punch is one of the best innovations about this map, I'd say the way they designed the spawn room and the playability of this map deserves some credit, especially compared to some of the future maps that lack it. Not to mention, a lot of maps ahead are pretty creative with the setting and direction of their respective maps, and I'd say Riese was a necessary step towards that direction, not just for gameplay, but in the actual connection between setting, story, and layout. Riese was the first good step at the rebirth of zombies, and it managed to properly lay the seeds for the progression in Black Ops 1. But additionally, it managed to implement a form of beauty throughout World of War. World of War was created in a period when Treyarch fumbled with Call of Duty 3, and Treyarch needed to make a good next game. And despite the fact that World of War sold less than Call of Duty 4, the game was necessary as the support for future installments, most especially Black Ops 1. Comparing Call of Duty 3 to Black Ops 1 is like night and day, but because of World of War, it allowed the devs to properly bridge the gap between both games and progress towards far more larger games like Black Ops 2. Zombies and the other modes could properly be developed, and the significance of World of War was necessary so other games could be far more better. And the role that Riese would have is that it managed to act as a second birth of the Zombies game, place the game mode in a direction that wouldn't have been as successful without it. It's for that reason, World of War achieves beauty through progression. Despite being part of the last map pack in World of War, Riese was the perfect way to conclude the progression throughout World of War, a kickstart into future games. But to me, and I'm sure to other people, World of War is one of the most important games out there. This was the game that got me into the series, and into gaming as a whole. Without the campaign and zombies, I wouldn't be in the same place as I am today. And as we approach the end of the map and the end of World of War, it feels bittersweet. I love this game. I genuinely do. Without this game, I would be in a shell of a human being compared to who I am today. Without this game, I wouldn't have my friends that stuck by me over the years. Without this game, I wouldn't have the same interest or care that I have nowadays. Without this game, this channel wouldn't exist. I wouldn't be making these videos and would probably be off making content that I regret making. World of War is the beginning of the series, and the beginning of this channel. I owe this game everything. I owe it. Yeah, I know, it's fucking Call of Duty. It's a series that's action-packed and you're more likely to be a racist than feel anything heartfelt and emotional. But despite that, this game is special to me. I've played a lot of games. A ridiculous amount, probably more than I'll ever need in my entire lifetime. Yet this one game created in 2008 is more special to me than most of them. And while ahead we'll discuss Black Ops 1, Kino, and all the other rest, I still love this game. But with that, with the conclusion of the progression in World of War, we move on to Black Ops 1, where we see the ambition and progression take center stage, and more specifically, we'll focus on the map that was supposed to be in the next DLC for World of War. It ended up being the first map that led to zombies becoming far more popular. But all in all, I suppose the one thing we can all take away from the series is a pretty short message. Vanguard can go fuck itself.
Surrounded! Bring it, motherfuckers! Bombs!
Will not feed!
We gotta move!